Ethan Carter is a highly respected craftsman in the small town of Everwood. With his exquisite woodworking skills and meticulous work ethic, he has earned the trust of all his neighbors. Every morning, he busily works in his workshop, transforming raw wood into exquisite furniture, each step imbued with his sweat and passion. Everyone in town knows that he is not only outstanding in his craft, but also a man who is always willing to help others and keeps his promises. Every evening, as the setting sun bathes his tired face in its glow, one can see a hopeful smile that reflects his faith in a bright future. Accompanying Ethan through the years is his wife, Victoria Carter, who is equally a radiant presence in Everwood. With her graceful manner and articulate speech, she naturally takes center stage at community gatherings, using her gentle smile and thoughtful arrangements to create a warm, homely atmosphere. Whether it is the meticulously decorated living room or the delicately prepared dishes at each gathering, all reveal Victoria's deep love and zest for life. To outsiders, their marriage appears to be the epitome of a perfect union, flawless in every way. Yet, beneath this dazzling exterior lie hidden fissures. Over time, Ethan's constant busyness in his workshop gradually caused him to neglect the tender warmth of home. He frequently delayed his return in his pursuit of perfection. Meanwhile, though Victoria maintained her composure and elegance, her inner world slowly became clouded with loneliness and a sense of loss. In the stillness of the night, when the household lights cast separate, solitary shadows, she would often be overwhelmed by nostalgia for the once warm moments they shared, mixed with confusion and discontent about what the future might hold. The warmth that had once comforted them in each other's embrace had drifted away, leaving only perfunctory greetings and the occasional smile. Every weekend, Victoria would bring carefully chosen fresh flowers to adorn their home, yet the emptiness in her eyes remained unexplained. Ethan, absorbed in taking on new orders, often overlooked even the slightest changes at home, missing the silent pleas of a melancholy Victoria. Although they lived under the same roof, it was as if they inhabited parallel worlds. At times, Victoria would let out a soft sigh in front of the mirror, as if recalling the passionate, dream-filled person she once was, while Ethan, amidst the grease and oil of his workshop, quietly allowed his passion for life and the warmth of family to wither away. What seemed like a perfect marriage was, in fact, already riddled with irreparable cracks. Unbeknownst to them, their hearts had drifted apart, with every smile masking an undercurrent of helplessness and solitude. In Everwood, people only saw the external brilliance, unaware that both were silently enduring an ever-deepening loneliness and sense of loss. It was precisely these seemingly insignificant separations that quietly sowed the seeds of an impending tragedy. In the quaint and tranquil town of Everwood, neighborly interactions always exuded a natural warmth. However, ever since a new resident named Daniel Foster moved in 2 years ago, an indescribable allure and secrecy began to permeate the town's atmosphere. Daniel had once endured a painful divorce that left a deep scar on his heart, making him all the more appreciative of the sincere care between people. With his witty humor and an air of mature composure in his speech, he quickly won the favor of Everwood's residents. Every afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the mottled shadows of trees and danced upon the winding alleys, Daniel would leisurely ride his slightly vintage bicycle through the streets. He often stopped by the community garden to chat and laugh with neighbors, sharing amusing anecdotes from his travels. In these seemingly ordinary conversations, he never failed to notice the subtle shifts in everyone's emotions. For Victoria, who usually carried herself with refined grace, yet concealed a hint of loneliness, each greeting and smile from Daniel felt like a long-missed warm current, offering a measure of solace amid her daily isolation. Unbeknownst to her, Victoria began to eagerly anticipate each accidental encounter with Daniel. They would often exchange brief words during community events, sharing their innermost thoughts under the gentle glow of the afternoon sun. Daniel patiently listened to Victoria as she confided in him about troubles that no one else could understand, and his meticulous care, along with his gentle words, gradually touched the softest corners of her heart. Every face-to-face exchange slowly pried open the walls she had built around herself, allowing her to feel cherished and truly understood for the first time in a long while. Yet neither of them realized the lurking danger within this budding affection. Deep within, Victoria's discontent with her mundane reality and loneliness was being awakened by Daniel's seemingly warm and hopeful words. At the same time, Daniel found in her tenderness a resonance he had long missed. It was amid these seemingly harmless daily exchanges that a hidden seed was quietly sown, a seed that would eventually lay the foundation for unforeseeable upheavals. The surface calm and warmth of Everwood was now harboring undercurrents stirred by this covertly emerging emotion, waiting for fate to one day unleash a turbulent storm. On a late autumn night, the biting wind swept through as the darkness over Everwood felt even more oppressive than usual. Ethan Carter had been working late in his workshop that day, and the exhaustion from overtime made him long to return to the warmth of his home. Yet, when he pushed open the door, he was met with an eerie silence. The familiar glow of the lights no longer bathed the walls with their usual comfort, and even Victoria's cell phone, a common fixture on the table, was nowhere to be seen. A sense of doubt and unease quietly began to grow within him, as if he were subconsciously sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold tonight. Stepping outside, Ethan followed the cool night breeze to his backyard. Just as he was about to turn back, he noticed that the back door of his neighbor, Daniel Foster's house, was also ajar, with a faint yellowish light escaping from within. The very same Daniel, who always greeted everyone with a warm smile and courteous manners, now seemed to betray a hint of secret panic. Ethan's intuition warned him that tonight's events were far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Taking a deep breath, he stepped purposefully toward that unusual door. Crossing the threshold into Daniel's home, Ethan noted that while the interior maintained its modern and minimalist decor, an inexplicable sense of unease permeated the air. Treading lightly down the hallway, he could faintly hear murmured laughter and hushed whispers, each step drawing him further into an unknown abyss. His heartbeat quickened, and beads of sweat began to form on his palms. When he reached a slightly ajar door at the end of the corridor, his inner premonition reached its zenith. The moment he pushed the door open, Ethan could hardly believe his eyes. Bathed in soft light, he witnessed Victoria and Daniel locked in a close embrace, utterly absorbed in each other's warmth, with no hint of reservation. In that instant, it felt as if he heard his heart shatter. Every cherished thought of happiness and trust evaporated into nothingness. Time seemed to freeze, leaving the entire world reduced to this overwhelming scene of betrayal, accompanied by the torrent of anger, loss, and despair surging inside him. Standing frozen in the doorway, Ethan's entire body stiffened, while his inner emotions raged uncontrollably. Every second now seemed destined to alter his fate. The once warm home and the steadfast trust they once shared had all been reduced to bitter irony. His thoughts spiraled wildly. Should he immediately confront them about the irrevocable betrayal, or should he silently endure, waiting for his emotions to burst forth uncontrollably? At that decisive moment, Ethan's simmering anger and anguish transformed rapidly into a deadly impulse. Every moment of hesitation felt like his nerves were being scorched, and in his mind flashed an extreme, desperate thought. Perhaps only an act of extreme violence could erase this memory, could force the betrayers to pay for their deceit. The gears of fate spun violently at that moment, hinting that an irreparable storm was about to sweep in. Then, as if on cue, the sound of footsteps emerged faintly in the distance, rendering the already heavy night even more eerie. Ethan stood at the threshold, his chest heaving with intense beats, overwhelmed by an unprecedented feeling of isolation and resolute determination. In that calm night of Everwood, every silent witness bore testament to what was unfolding. A life that once seemed peaceful was about to be irrevocably shattered by a moment of betrayal, and from this very choice, Ethan's future would plunge into a point of no return. At the very instant that fatal scene was frozen before Ethan's eyes, time seemed to stand still. The image before him mercilessly tore apart all his illusions of a beautiful life. His dearly beloved wife, Victoria, was unabashedly indulging in forbidden intimacy with Daniel. Their intertwined bodies evoked in him an overwhelming sense of humiliation and despair he had never experienced before. In that moment, his heart felt as if it were being ripped apart, all trust and warmth dissolving into boundless anger and agony, a destructive force surging wildly within him. Overwhelmed by fury, betrayal, and despair that swept over him like a tempest, his hand shot up instinctively. Without a moment's hesitation, he seized the nearby heavy lamp, a fixture that had silently accompanied him through countless nights, now transformed into an instrument for unleashing his wrath. The weighty lamp seemed to ignite with raging fire in his grip, his pulse pounding rapidly, each trembling beat foreshadowing the imminent outbreak of violence. Ethan did not hesitate. He charged forward, delivering a brutal blow with the lamp toward Daniel, who was enshrouded in the act of betrayal. The lamp sliced through the air and struck Daniel's head with a shocking impact, instantly splattering blood across the once immaculate room. In that very moment, every emotion coalesced into a series of savage blows and frenzied strikes. Daniel struggled desperately, but could not withstand the onslaught of Ethan's uncontrollable rage. Blood splattered and anguished cries, mingled with stifled gasps, echoing throughout the room. As Daniel crumpled to the ground, Ethan's gaze swiftly shifted toward the still hesitant Victoria by his side. She trembled in terror, attempting to explain in a wavering voice. Yet, in Ethan's eyes, she had long become the embodiment of all betrayal and deceit. Consumed by deep-seated hatred, he could no longer restrain the burning fury within him. Ethan lunged at Victoria, the lamp once again a deadly weapon in his hands, each swing imbued with an inextinguishable mix of anger and despair. His relentless blows fell like hammers, as if he sought to shatter every ounce of pain and betrayal in that single moment. Blood, tears, and rage merged together, transforming the room into a crimson inferno of agony. The cold lamp not only obliterated Daniel's dignity, but also left Victoria's anguished wails echoing in the dark, a mournful testimony to her remorse over the choices made and the irrevocable collapse of a once-cherished marriage. As the final crushing blow landed, the clamor in the room abruptly ceased, leaving behind only the faint light that illuminated the scene of carnage and misery. Ethan stood amid the chaos and bloodshed, his eyes flickering with a mix of madness and bitterness. In that fleeting moment, he had completely transformed from a refined craftsman into a man who had lost all control, a murderer burdened with an overwhelming sense of guilt and despair. Now consumed entirely by hopelessness and fury, the once beautiful world he had known was irrevocably shattered by the violent outburst of a single, devastating moment. Immediately after the blood-soaked rampage subsided for a brief moment, Ethan experienced a sudden moment of clarity that harshly revealed the brutal reality. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Standing amidst the ruined room, its walls marred by tragic bloodstains, a torrent of complex emotions surged within him. The shock of his uncontrollable outburst mingled with an overwhelming fear of the unbearable consequences that lay ahead. As reason gradually overcame his raw fury, Ethan knew that every subsequent action would determine whether he could evade the punishment of this living nightmare. Without delay, he quickly scanned his surroundings and began methodically cleaning up the scene. First, he staggered toward the bathroom and retrieved an old towel from a cabinet. With a nervous, almost mechanical precision, he started wiping the blood from his trembling hands, desperate to erase the vivid traces of his violent act. Each forceful swipe felt like a battle against the terror that churned deep within him. Next, Ethan returned to the living room, where he painstakingly moved back and forth across the blood-stained floor with a damp cloth. He meticulously cleaned every area that might have retained fingerprints, terrified that even the slightest piece of evidence would expose his crime. Not stopping there, he also adjusted the scattered furniture and other objects in the room with a meticulous attention to detail. He carefully placed the lamp, the very one he had just wielded, in a spot near a table not far from the pool of blood, in a bid to create the illusion that a fierce struggle had taken place. Every detail was deliberately orchestrated. He even rearranged some toppled ornaments to craft a scene of chaos that, at a glance, appeared almost natural. Though his heart was laden with fear and remorse, Ethan forced himself to remain calm, executing every task with utmost caution and speed. As he worked, he frequently glanced back to confirm that the doors and windows remained undisturbed before proceeding further. His heart continued to race, and it seemed as though the echoes of the screams and agonizing cries from his earlier rampage still reverberated in his ears. Every minute, every passing second, heightened his sense of urgency, as if the sirens of a police car might pierce the silence at any moment. Despite the relentless pressure of time, he persisted in his efforts, swiftly and precisely, wiping away any bloodstains that might have lingered. His actions a desperate, albeit imperfect, attempt to cover up the indelible mark of his crime. In the midst of this desperate and mechanical act of camouflage, a silent cry resounded deep within him. Could these frantic efforts secure even a fleeting moment of peace? Would they be enough to help him evade the inevitable punishment awaiting him? The answer remained shrouded in uncertainty, hidden within the frantic movements of his busy hands, with every swipe feeling like a final desperate battle against fate itself. Finally, as he stood in the newly rearranged room, surveying the scene that faintly hinted at the traces of a struggle, Ethan knew with a sinking realization that the true nightmare was only just beginning. In the early hours of the morning after the incident, the streets of Everwood were cordoned off by police cars and yellow tape, and the cold, biting wind carried an atmosphere of palpable tension. Two detectives, Detective Amelia Brooks and Detective Simon Grant, arrived at the scene, confronted with a chaotic mix of bloodstains and a meticulously arranged crime scene. Both detectives sensed that something was amiss. They immediately began a detailed investigation, starting with the door handles that had been deliberately wiped, along with the residual fingerprints and blood splatters. While Brooks examined every minute detail carefully, Grant snapped photos and recorded every trace of evidence they could find. After repeatedly scrutinizing the scene, they discovered several details that defied common sense. Bloodstains along the door's edge had been intentionally wiped off, with some areas left completely clean, as if the perpetrator had hurriedly sanitized certain spots. At the same time, a blurry surveillance video from a nearby neighbor's camera revealed a figure quietly appearing in front of Daniel's back door late at night. Although the image was unclear, the figure's build and gait unmistakably matched the descriptions of the violent movements observed at the scene. Detective Brooks connected these details with the evidence from the scene and began to suspect that this was not a mere crime of passion, but a premeditated act staged to look like a heated altercation. Meanwhile, Detective Grant learned from local residents that on the night of the incident, someone had seen Ethan Carter hurrying away from his cottage, and soon after, he was spotted in the alley leading to Daniel's house. Multiple pieces of evidence gradually pointed to Ethan. His unusual actions, combined with the physical clues at the scene, forced the detectives to focus their attention on the normally unassuming and refined craftsman. After an initial comparison of blood samples and fingerprints, the police found that some of the traces did not belong to the victims but matched Ethan's DNA with a high degree of accuracy. Furthermore, the blurry figure captured on the surveillance footage had a movement pattern that corresponded closely with Ethan's recorded behavior on that fateful night. Detective Brooks, her tone calm yet resolute, stated, "All the evidence seems to point to one person. We must continue our investigation to uncover every last clue he left behind in an attempt to cover up the truth." Meanwhile, Detective Grant meticulously documented every detail, preparing to gradually unravel this baffling chain of events during subsequent interrogations. As the police pieced together the full picture, the quiet town of Everwood began to sense a ripple of unease. Residents whispered among themselves, speculating about the dark crime that had been silently brewing under the cover of night, a crime destined to plunge their beloved town into turmoil. And the truth, much like the carefully cleaned-up traces at the scene, waited to be mercilessly uncovered. The events quickly reached their climax. With mounting evidence from the police pointing squarely at Ethan Carter, the once gentle and refined craftsman ultimately had to face the harsh and unyielding reality in court. During the trial, his defense attorneys attempted to argue that his brutal actions were the result of a momentary loss of control, seeking to elicit a sliver of sympathy for his deeds. However, the surveillance footage, fingerprints, and the meticulously staged crime scene all testified to a premeditated act of evil. In the end, the court found Ethan guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to 40 years in prison. In prison, Ethan was left alone with memories that could never be erased. His once warm and loving home had been reduced to nothing but endless remorse and terror in the cold confines of his cell. In the stillness of the long nights, he often reflected on the moment he set himself on this irreversible path, his thoughts swirling in endless torment with no hint of redemption. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear the brutal sounds of the altercation and Victoria's agonized cries, each echo serving as a stark reminder that a single moment of emotional breakdown could cost an entire life dearly. Meanwhile, in the town of Everwood, the once peaceful and harmonious way of life was now shrouded in an indelible shadow. Neighbors whispered about the horrific incident, and the laughter and harmony of the past had been replaced by doubt and questioning of trust and warmth. People were forced to reflect. When loneliness and despair gradually erode the soul without timely communication and support, even a spark of betrayal can ignite an uncontrollable catastrophe. Ethan's tragedy was not merely a personal downfall. It became a profound interrogation of the fragility of human nature for the entire town. The blood-stained shadows of that fateful night and its irreversible consequences served as a constant alarm bell, reminding everyone to cherish those close to them and to listen to the calls of their inner heart. It was through this deep reflection that the people of Everwood began to realize that only mutual trust and understanding can prevent such tragedies from repeating, that every peaceful day must be guarded with sincere care.